My name is Tamsin Locketch, though most people who knew me in my former life called me Lieutenant Colonel Locketch. For 25 years, I served in Cyber Command, fighting silent wars on digital battlefields that most people don't even know exist. I've unraveled terrorist networks, shut down national security breaches, and briefed senators who looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. I thought I had seen the worst of what people could do to each other, but none of it, not a single moment in all those years of service prepared me for the day I came home to the house my grandfather built, only to be told I was a trespasser. It all started on a crisp evening in late September. I had just gotten out of a cab, my official discharge papers still feeling warm in my bag. 25 years of my life, neatly folded. I stood on the sidewalk looking at the old house, the place that was supposed to be my anchor in the civilian world. The porch light flickered, a weak, hesitant glow that used to mean welcome home. Now it just felt like surveillance. Before I tell you the rest of my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so please drop a comment down below. And if you enjoy stories about justice, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. I pressed the button on the intercom, and after a long moment, my sister Delilah's face appeared on the small screen at the top of the stairs. There was no smile, no flicker of recognition even. She just stared down at me and said, her voice flat and cold, "I'm calling the police." For a second, I thought it had to be a joke, maybe some twisted, cruel welcome home prank. But then I saw her hand already hovering over her phone, her thumb poised over the screen. "You can't just show up here," she snapped, her voice sharp with an anger I didn't understand. "This isn't your home anymore, Tamsin. You left. You disappeared." I just came back from service, Delilah," I said, my voice catching on the last word, feeling as brittle and fragile as a dry autumn leaf. I thought maybe I could see Mom." "She doesn't want to see you," she shot back, her expression like stone. "Neither does Dad." And then she delivered the line that hit me harder than any explosion I'd ever experienced. "You're not in the will. You're not even on the deed." 10 minutes later, just as she'd promised, a police cruiser pulled up to the curb. One of the officers was young, all business. The other was older, with a military-style buzz cut. He hesitated for a moment when he saw my uniform, and a flicker of recognition, or maybe just respect, crossed his face. "Lieutenant Colonel Locketch?" he asked. I just nodded. It didn't matter. "This property belongs to Delilah Thatcher and Richard Locketch," the younger officer said, reading from his notes. "There's no record of you having legal access, ma'am." I stepped back as the wrought iron gate began to close again, the soft whir of the motor sounding like a final, definitive goodbye. And in that moment, standing on the outside, looking in, I realized a war far colder and far more personal than any I had ever fought had just begun. This time, I wasn't fighting a foreign enemy. I was fighting my own blood. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would not lose. I didn't leave that night. I couldn't. I just drove my rental car 2 blocks down the street, parked under a flickering street lamp, and sat in the dark. My coat was zipped up to my chin, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the autumn air. The house, my grandfather's house, was still visible at the end of the lane, its windows glowing with a soft, warm light, pretending like nothing was wrong, like our family wasn't broken. But it was. I could see from my car that the front lawn, which my grandmother had filled with vibrant hydrangeas, was now just a neat, sterile patch of grass with a single, crooked sign stabbed into the soil. "For sale, private listing." I stared at that sign until the letters blurred. I hadn't cried in over a decade. Not when I was deployed to dangerous places. Not when we lost good soldiers. Not even when I came home to an empty apartment that felt more like a barracks than a home. But that night, sitting alone in a dark car, something inside me just cracked. The place that was supposed to be my home, the place where I climbed trees with my grandfather while he taught me Morse code, the place where I slept under a ceiling of glow-in-the-dark stars, was being sold. My entire history, my connection to this place, was being erased. And it was clear that the people inside didn't care at all. I stayed in that car until the sun came up. My uniform, which had felt like a suit of armor just hours before, was now creased and uncomfortable, the sharp folds digging into my skin like tiny accusations. As dawn broke, I saw a figure move in the living room. It was my father. Still thin, still ramrod straight like he was about to step into a corporate boardroom. He walked over to the window, looked out at the perfect lawn, and never once glanced toward the street. He didn't see me, or maybe he just didn't want to. I pulled out my phone, a sliver of foolish hope making me check for a message. Maybe my mom had reached out. Maybe there was some explanation. But there was only one unread text from an unknown number. It just said, "Return to base. There's nothing for you here." I let the phone drop. I wasn't going back to any base. I had served my time. And I was not built for surrender. At 9 o'clock, I walked into a small cafe on Jefferson Street. Ruth Clay was already there, sitting in a back corner booth. She was a lawyer now, dressed in a sharp blazer. But she looked just like she had in our college dorm room before our lives went in completely different directions. When she saw me, her professional mask slipped for a second, and I saw a flash of genuine concern in her eyes. She didn't waste time on small talk. She just turned her tablet toward me. "Thought you might want to see this," she said. On the screen was a real estate listing for 1450 Windermere Lane, my grandfather's house. The owner was listed as Ravencrest Holdings, LLC. "I never signed anything," I said, my voice flat. "That's what I figured," she replied. She swiped to another screen, showing a property transfer document filed 3 months prior. And there it was, on the seller line, my name, Tamsin Lockitch. "That's not my signature." "No," she said quietly, "it's not, but we're going to prove that." And just like that, the shapeless, overwhelming feeling of betrayal started to take form. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a crime. It was a war to be fought not on a battlefield, but in courtrooms and records offices, a war against family lies, forged ink, and one stolen home. And for the first time since I'd stepped out of that cab, I felt a familiar surge of purpose. I was ready to fight. We sat there in that cafe, the world buzzing around us, but our table felt like a command center. Ruth, my old friend turned lawyer, was already mapping out a strategy, pulling up document after document. She moved with a calm, focused intensity that I recognized from my own world. "This notary," she said, tapping the corner of the screen where a signature was stamped on the fake deed transfer. "He was suspended last year, falsifying documents. It seems he's made a career out of it." My jaw clenched. So this was all planned. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. "Tamsin," Ruth said, her voice soft but firm. "They did more than plan it. They executed it like a military operation. It was fast, clean, and designed to be invisible." "Delilah told me I was cut out of the will," I said, the memory still stinging. Ruth pulled up another file, a county registry record. "Your grandfather left the house to you, but a month after he passed, a new will was filed. This new version leaves everything to your father and Delilah. They forged the will too. The scope of their betrayal was staggering."
Either that, or they coerced him into signing it. Either way, it's a fight. But if we can find an original copy of his true will, we can challenge this one. I have copies, I muttered, my mind racing. Digital backups. Encrypted. He even kept a video journal. Maybe he mentioned it there. Ruth's eyes lit up. That's it. That's what we need. Any inconsistency, a timestamp, a witness, a different signature, it's enough to blow their whole case wide open. I leaned back, the reality of it all sinking in. They had looked me in the eye and lied. They had systematically erased me from our family's history, all while hiding their crimes behind a shell company. Ravencrest Holdings, Ruth continued, is the key. And guess whose name is on the logistics filings for the company? I didn't have to guess. Brian Calloway, Delilah's husband. Yep, Ruth confirmed. Your brother-in-law, the international freight specialist, always traveling, never quite clear where he's going or what he's shipping. She started scribbling notes on a legal pad. Okay, first, I'm filing an injunction to freeze the sale of the house. Then we subpoena the notary, pull every land record associated with that property, and start unraveling the ownership of Ravencrest. We'll find out where the money is coming from and where it's going. It was a clear, strategic plan, but even with Ruth's confidence, I felt a deep, aching sadness. They thought I would just go away. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They don't know me at all, I said, more to myself than to Ruth. No, she said, looking up from her notes with a small, determined smile. They really don't. That night, something pulled me back to the house. I drove past again, slowly. The porch light was off, the windows were dark, the hydrangeas were gone. It looked like a stranger's house now, polished and sterile. They had tried to erase all the memories, but they couldn't erase the ghost of the life that was lived there. My ghost. They had taken my home on paper, but I had a pen of my own, and I was about to write myself back into the story. The first major breakthrough came from an unexpected place. I pulled the utility records for the house, Ruth said over the phone a few days later, her voice tight with suspicion. There are massive power spikes every night, like clockwork, the kind of power usage you'd see for industrial refrigeration. Refrigeration for what? I asked, my mind immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios. That's the thing, she said. There are no permits for any renovations, no business licenses registered to the address, but someone is definitely running heavy-duty equipment in that basement. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I knew that pattern. It was the signature of a black market operation, quiet, hidden in plain sight, and protected by the veneer of suburban normalcy. I need to see it for myself, I said. I figured you would. Just be careful, Tamsin. That evening, I was back in my car, parked in the shadows, watching the house. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. I was just operating on instinct. Around 11:45, a man appeared across the street. He was nondescript, in a baseball cap and a plain jacket, but he didn't belong there. He leaned against a lamppost, scanned the street, and then walked away. As he passed my car, he made a quick, subtle motion. After he was gone, I saw a small piece of folded paper tucked under my windshield wiper. There was no envelope, just one line written in all caps. If you're really Tamsin, meet me at Alley 9, 11 p.m. Come alone. I didn't hesitate. The alley behind my grandfather's house was dark and narrow, smelling of oil and damp earth. A man stepped out of the shadows. He had the weathered face and rough hands of a mechanic and a faded Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm. "I knew your grandfather," he said, his voice a low growl. Name's Ethan. I've lived here a long time. I know when something ain't right. What have you seen? I asked. They're telling the neighbors you're unstable, he said, that you've got issues from your time in the service. That's the story your sister is spreading. I didn't react. Let them talk. But I've seen the vans, he continued, always at night. No plates. They back in here, unload crates. Real quiet. It's always the same guy in charge. Tall, wears gloves, never says a word. He paused, his eyes meeting mine in the dim light. Your sister's husband, Brian. Do you know what's in the crates? Can't get close enough to see, but it ain't furniture. They go straight into that basement, and then the whole neighborhood's lights dim for a second when they turn on whatever's down there. I pulled a small, high-fidelity audio recorder from my pocket. I need to get inside, I said. That's not a smart move, he warned. These aren't the kind of people who follow the rules. I don't care about their rules, I replied. Later that night, dressed in black, I slipped back into the alley. I found a small ventilation grate for the basement, hidden behind an overgrown bush. I couldn't see inside, but the sound was clear. I carefully slid the audio recorder into the vent, activated it remotely, and settled in to wait. Hours passed. Then, just after midnight, I heard the low rumble of a truck. The back door opened. Voices drifted up through the vent. And then I heard it. A voice that made my blood run cold. It was slow, deliberate, with a southern accent I would have recognized anywhere. It was my father. If the officer finds out, he said, his voice calm and authoritative, there's no warning. Sever the tie. I stopped breathing. He wasn't just a bystander. He wasn't just complicit. He was leading it. I backed away from the house, my hand shaking as I clutched the phone that was connected to the recorder. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I did what I had been trained to do for 25 years. I documented the evidence. I cataloged the crime, and I disappeared back into the shadows. Now I had proof. And the war had my father's voice as its soundtrack. When I went to retrieve the recorder the next morning, it was gone. The vent was empty. They knew. They knew I was watching, which meant they were watching me back. An hour later, the text came through. You're playing with fire. I have your military psych file. Want to see what it says about you? They were trying to rattle me, to use my service, my sacrifice against me, but they had fundamentally misunderstood the kind of soldier I was. I didn't panic. I didn't delete the message. I forwarded it to Ruth and to a man named Isaac Ng, a top cybersecurity analyst I had served with. His reply came in 6 minutes. They've made a mistake. Start building the chain. Don't wait. My small apartment became a command center. I pulled out encrypted drives, laptops, backup servers. For years, I had kept digital copies of everything: emails, property files, call logs. They were no longer just memories. They were ammunition. Ruth brought in a digital forensics expert who, using Isaac's guidance, began to unravel the web of lies. They traced IP addresses from the shell company, Ravencrest, back to Brian's logistics firm. They found the midnight wire transfers that screamed of money laundering. And then Isaac found the final piece. He said, his voice grim over our secure call, the leasing contract for the warehouse space, the one Ravencrest is using for storage. The signature on it, Tamsin, it's your father's. He hadn't just known about the illegal operation. He had authorized it. He had signed his name to it. "That's it," Ruth said, her voice like steel. "Forgery, fraud, conspiracy, federal contract abuse. We're not just fighting for the house anymore. We're taking them down. We go to court now." 2 days later, we walked right up the front driveway. I was in my full dress uniform. Ruth was in her sharpest suit. When Delilah opened the door, her practiced smile faltered and died. "We're here to serve you with a court injunction," Ruth said, handing her the envelope. "Effective immediately, all assets tied to this address are frozen." Brian appeared behind her, his face a mask of arrogant disbelief. "You really want to do this, Tamsin?" "I was trained for this," I said, my voice steady. "You don't know who you're fighting," he sneered. "I do," I replied. "A fraudster, an accomplice, and a coward who used my name and my service record to enrich himself." "You're unstable," Delilah hissed. "I've been evaluated," I said, calmly. "You'll see the results of that evaluation entered into evidence." We turned and walked away, the sound of the door slamming behind us. "They'll hit back hard," Ruth warned. "They already did. Now it's our turn." The courtroom felt like a sterile, silent battlefield. I sat at the witness table, my uniform crisp, my back straight. When the prosecutor asked me to explain what happened, I told them everything. The forged signature, the fake will, the shell company, the illegal operation running out of my grandfather's basement, the wire transfers, and finally, the audio recording of my father's voice ordering someone to sever the tie if they were discovered. Delilah refused to look at me. Brian whispered frantically to his lawyer. My father just stared straight ahead, as if by not making eye contact, he could make me disappear. But he couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge's verdict was swift and decisive. Delilah was sentenced to 6 years, Brian 10, and my father, Richard Lockitch, received 15 years in a federal prison with no possibility of parole. As I walked out of the courthouse, I didn't feel triumph. I just felt quiet. The war was over. I hadn't gotten the house back, not yet. I hadn't gotten their money, but I had gotten something far more valuable. I had gotten my name back. I had reclaimed my honor. Weeks later, I visited the Defense Service Library, and there, in the black granite of the Wall of Honor, was my name, Lieutenant Colonel Tamsin Lockitch, Cyber Command, 1998 to 2023. No one could ever erase that. My family had tried to make me a ghost in my own life, but they had failed. I had stood for truth, not for vengeance, and in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. I had stood, and I was unshaken.